Well, our next speaker this morning is Mr. Travis Reese, and he is the president of FireEye. Mr. Reese was previously president of Mandiant Consulting and Eyesight Intelligence, overseeing the organization that delivers FireEye incident response and strategic consulting services, as well as cyber threat intelligence solutions. Presenting to us this morning, cybersecurity on the front lines. Insights from today's most important breach investigations. Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together to welcome Mr. Travis Reese.
In 2014, a major wave of cyber breaches hit the US. Countless businesses and government agencies were victims of advanced cyber attacks. This presented a bigger challenge in Asia Pacific, where similar breaches were common but rarely discovered. They went undetected due to lax security and leaders who underestimated the risks. To help improve the region's security and support its growing business in the region, cybersecurity company FireEye launched a campaign that would bring the issue to the fore.
What's really unique about what we've been seeing lately is just a very high number of cyber attacks directed at organizations in the Asia-Pacific region.
These attacks are in all corners of the world today.
At the moment, we're responding to about 30 different major breaches around the world. 29 of those we believe are state-sponsored.
Regional tensions are reflected in cyberspace.
10 years this operation remained in play, and yet nobody knew about it until now. How did you discover it?
So what we've uncovered is a cyber threat operation that's been targeting and exploiting the networks of governments and businesses across Southeast Asia and India for the best part of a decade.
They didn't need to change, most likely because organizations in the region, governments and commercial entities, weren't very aware that they were getting targeted.
This is not a war that we can afford to give up, right? I mean, this is a war that we actually have to fight against. And the reality is that we have actually more warriors with guns than more warriors with keyboards.
If a nation state targets the average person, the consumer at home, government resources will be able to compromise that computer and that person.
And according to cybersecurity firm FireEye, there are also state-sponsored hacking groups, and increasingly, companies in Asia are likely to be a target.
Anywhere where you have geopolitical tensions running hot, the cyber threats run hot accordingly.
2 years ago, we thought there were 17 nations with offensive cyber capabilities. Today, we think that's closer to 50.
And I think politically, as you see an uptick in things that cause friction amongst nations in this region, then you'll see higher increased levels of cyber. And that typically will lead to more distrust.
It's interesting, when there is a real-world flashpoint, it becomes a cyber flashpoint, and then just aggravates the real-world relationship even more.
All right. Clapping for the video, awesome. I hope you don't mind. I cannot stand behind a podium and just talk to you about, what I've got to say today. So I'm going to walk around a lot, so hopefully the cameras can stay on me. Good luck trying. And I hope you've all had your coffee today. So I'm from upstate New York. I talk really fast. And when you try to give me a lot of content in a half an hour, that can be an extremely big challenge for me. But let me start out by giving you some of my background. You noticed I'm not in any of the videos. It's very rare people see me doing public keynote speeches. And that's primarily because where I grew up and the background that I have in the intelligence and national security community. And so I started my career with Kevin Mandia, the co-founder of Mandia, as a special agent in the Air Force. And so my entire adult life was chasing bad guys through Department of Defense and military bases some of the first guys to stick intrusion detection on the Pentagon, and we would see all of the traditional state-sponsored attacks back in the early 90s. None of that seems to have changed. But after 10 years in the government, I had a hypothesis that I could do more for national security if I got out of the government and funded a firm that actually was doing more of the classified support for the national security community. So I went to Washington, D.C. I co-founded the Forensics and Intrusion Unit for a startup, and I spent the next decade inside of every three-letter agency in the United States. And so built a lot of capabilities for the intelligence, national defense community, and I can tell you, when you dedicate yourself about moving incredibly fast from a commercial perspective, helping the government, you can do some absolutely amazing things from an innovation perspective and a freedom of movement from a commercial side of the house. That company was acquired by a relatively large defense contractor, and that's when Kevin Mandy and I decided to co-found Mandiant and take everything we learned in the government and how do we wrap that into solutions that we can start building an incident response capability to go exceptionally fast at how you think about responding to nation-state threats. And back in 2008, when we launched our first products and put our visibility across all of the major US defense contractors, there wasn't a US defense contractor that wasn't massively compromised by nation-state actors. We would go in and we would find thousands of systems compromised, hundreds of different backdoors. And we went through an evolution in the United States from the mid-2000s to 2010 that massively changed the dynamic in the country about how we thought about cybersecurity and what we needed to do to really start protecting ourselves. And then FireEye came along and acquired our company Mandiant, and Kevin and I had the privilege to put Mandiant inside of the firm, transition it over the last few years, and then more recently, Dave DeWalt has become our executive chairman, and Kevin has become our CEO, and I've become the president. So I spend my days managing the inside of the company. So I'm usually not out in front of folks talking, but this is a privilege for me as I was invited and to see so many incredibly great dignitaries and folks coming together in Singapore. I'm privileged that you're taking such a bold stance in how you think about cybersecurity. So I can't wait to talk to you about some of these interesting topics today. All right, a little bit more background though, some context, because as I tell you some of my thoughts and how I view cybersecurity, I think it's important to understand the lens at which I'm coming from. You heard me talk about my career, but this is what's going on at the company every single day. We have over 400 incident responders across the globe responding to all of the breaches you hear about in the press. So when you've been and heard about all these keynotes, and you listen to folks talk about the Sony breach and all of these other breaches, we are the firm that's usually in the majority of those breaches, learning firsthand what the adversaries are doing, what's really going on the front lines of cybersecurity, and more importantly, what is working and not working from a technology process point of view. So tremendous amount of visibility from that incident response that feeds into a threat intelligence engine at the back end of the company. We have 11 million sensors across the globe that feeds from the FireEye network into the threat engine. So a ton of machine learning on the back end of all of that data set. We have 7 SOCs around the globe with 24/7, 365 operations where we've got hundreds of clients, some of the biggest and best brands in the world, that count on our company to provide adequate protection. So we get to see campaigns that are happening at a global scale every single day from the majority of these actors that are out there. And then we acquired Eyesight Partners at the beginning of this year. They're a pure play intelligence firm. So we now have 350 intelligence experts and researchers sitting in over 20 countries with 29 native languages who are at the forefront of watching what the adversaries are doing. So they're taking a look at what are these groups up to, what's happening, what's going on in the dark web, and that's all being fed into this threat engine on the back end of our company. Why is this important? Back at Mandiant, we tracked about 800 different adversarial groups, and overnight with the addition of Eyesight, we are now tracking over 16,000 different adversarial groups in our company on a daily basis. So tremendous amount of visibility as far as what's actually really going on in the threat landscape. So I don't have to tell anyone in this audience, especially after a few days of the conference, kind of what the threat landscape looks like, but I do want to share just my perspective because I think it's important given kind of the view that we have of the world. I think everyone would agree with me. unbelievable acceleration of the technology has created the situation we're in. Every one of us in this room, every one of our companies, every one of our governments and military have become absolutely dependent on the technology that we use. So the future of warfare, the future of everything we're doing as citizens is all interconnected to the problem that we face, which is the growing problem of cybersecurity. So this has resulted in an exponentially increased threat landscape because of the different platforms and systems and solutions we are now using in an ecosystem. And what you've seen over the past 3 years is really an explosion of what I would consider the public breaches. I think an interesting thing from my perspective is this isn't new. None of this has really changed. It's not incredibly different than it's been in years past or even in decades past when it comes from there have always been a lot of folks focused on breaching systems. And so I think the difference is it's now become mainstream. It's in the news. You can't open a paper anymore without seeing something about a breach. What's good about the fact that there's a lot of now awareness, it's really now at the highest levels of government and business. So this is a boardroom discussion. Why is it important that now the minister comes and talks about cybersecurity strategy and why it's a boardroom discussion? Is because we're no longer trying to have to educate folks why we should have cybersecurity budgets, why it's important. Remember what it was like a few years ago? And it was really hard to convince your companies to make the kinds of investments. It was really hard, in my opinion, for certain governments to start building some of the strategies. You saw just in the keynote presentation before me, we've really just started on this journey for these countries to build kind of their cybersecurity strategy and start implementing it. So I think the awareness is good, even though if you're the victim of one of those breaches, it is never fun being on the headlines of the national news or national paper. And so we also have to, in my opinion, be careful of how we re-victimize all of the victims who have gone through significant breaches, because everyone loves to talk about the Targets of the world, or when Google gets breached, or the Sony Pictures breach. I mean, these are real human beings that are impacted. You know, when you sit and you talk to the CEO who's been impacted at a company like that, it's a significant deal. And so I don't have to tell you, it's affecting all size companies and all industries, across all countries. And so let me tell you what we've learned. And so every year we publish what we call our M-Trends report. It's a summary of the investigations that we conduct and what are the things that we're learning from those investigations. Why is this different than some of the other reports you might read? It's not academic. We're not going out and looking at someone else's malware that they found from another breach. This is real world. We've responded to it from the front lines. And what are we saying as far as the things that we see? Now, this data is a little flawed because we primarily respond to the biggest breaches, the most significant ones. And so we're not always doing the PCI payment breaches. We're not out to every retailer. So there is a little bit of a flaw with the data set that we have. I encourage you to download the report from our website. We've created for the first year an Asia-Pacific edition of the report. And so if going forward, we plan on trying to segment as much as possible to not just provide even Asia-Pacific, but even more regional views so you get a chance to get better granularity on the data sets that we have. One of the key statistics that we measure in the report every single year is the number of days it takes for a victim to detect that an attack occurred. So from initial point of entry to detection. Why do we think this is important? Because this tells you the state of the union of detection as an industry, as an organization, as a country. And the average worldwide number is 146 days. So that's the worldwide average. The average across Asia Pacific is 520. So what does that tell us all in this room? We have work to do in Asia Pacific to make sure that we bring this detection number down. But that being said, there's wide differences across the region of different countries and where you're at. And so I do think you've got to take a look at that from a more granular perspective. Some other interesting numbers though. The average number of devices we analyze per organization in Asia Pacific when we're doing an investigation is over 21,000. The average number of internet access points is 4. The average number of devices compromised by a threat actor is 78. The average number of accounts that they compromise user accounts is 10. The average number of admin accounts is 3, and the average amount of stolen data is 3.7 gigabytes. Why do I share this information? Because if you are responding to breaches in your government or in your enterprise organizations, and your numbers are a lot less than this, I would argue you probably are playing whack-a-mole, remediating malware, and probably haven't fully scoped your incident. And we see that time and time again when we go into an organization who is fighting an adversary who's usually just facing the malware problem versus truly facing the scope and scale of the incident. And so, I only say that to where if you're talking to your incident response teams and you're hearing, oh yes, an adversary came in, we had an incident, but we got it right away, and it was only one piece of malware. I would question that if I was a CIO or a CEO. Some other fun and fast facts, I'm not going to go through all of these, but 100% of the organizations that we respond to have very traditional and good security. So we're not responding to the small companies, we're responding to governments, large Fortune 2000, Fortune 500, Fortune 10, and they have fairly mature and robust security programs. They all have antivirus. They all have firewalls. Most of them have security operations centers. The only thing that I want to say is you really have to look at what the legacy security industry has provided us and how do we evolve past that to really be able to defeat the more advanced attacks. Another fun statistic that I like to send out there is we analyze every single one of the spear phishing campaigns. And so we track all of them. And this is an interesting statistic. So 29% of the time that an adversary is launching their campaign, it's happening on a Wednesday. And so if you're a manager in this room, you do not approve leave for any of your staff on Wednesdays. And so I wanted to show you just an example of there's real humans behind these attacks. This isn't just some fictional thing where it's just happening from country to country. This is actually an attack from a Chinese operator from the PLA. It's Unit 61398. And this is that operator setting up their Facebook account through their Yahoo. And so they're setting up a persona to be able to carry out attacks. After they set up their Facebook account, what do? They start populating their Facebook account to make it look like they're coming from a US Navy person. Populate all the content, start friending people, start making it look like it's a real US military individual. What do you think they do after they populate all of this persona information online? That's when they start their spear phishing campaigns. And so here are some actual phishing lures used in the region. And so these are some documents that have embedded malicious code. And usually it's an attachment, it's a link. And people ask me all the time, can we just train our users to stop clicking on the links? And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a secret. For 10 years, we've been trying in the United States to train people to stop clicking on links, and there's no way to train to solve this problem. You can eliminate it and get it down to maybe 10%, but it's a human issue, and there is nothing you're going to be able to do to completely train this problem away, which means you do have to think about how to protect yourself through email, which is still the #1 way adversaries get in. And people say to me, well, why? Don't they have more advanced tools? Oh, absolutely. I can guarantee you that almost every one of these nation-state organizations have very sophisticated 0 days, very sophisticated tool sets, but why would you burn them? Why would you use them if you can get in 99.9% of the time by an unsophisticated spear phishing campaign? And so think about that, because if you do stop them at the spear phishing, they will come in with other more sophisticated tools, and we've seen that. And the unfortunate reality is if you completely stop them through the best cybersecurity program in the world, you will see human beings showing up at your firms from an espionage perspective. It does happen. We see it way more often than people realize. 4 big trends came out of our kind of analysis of all the cases we did over the last year. One was a fairly significant shift in state-sponsored actors taking extremely large amounts of PII information. They came after organizations that are very public, like OPM and healthcare organizations and multiple different pension funds. We saw a very significant amount of PII being collected and harvested by state actors. And that's a shift that we've seen over the past year. It's not just criminal organizations using it for monetization anymore. Something that keeps me up at night and makes me really start to worry about the evolving threat landscape is we're now starting to see a shift into significantly higher business disruption. You used to see adversaries who would come in, they would take what they want. If it was economic, they would steal something economically, they would get out. If it was state-sponsored, we had unwritten rules of gentlemen's agreements. I mean, espionage has been going on forever. It's kind of known that militaries always are spying on each other's militaries. Everyone has seen what NSA is up to. So the reality is normally you go and you do a state-sponsored activity against another military or government entity, and you get caught, you back away. You don't try to maintain persistence. You don't continue to fight the defenders as they're in there. But the fact now that we've got criminal and state-sponsored groups that are willing to go and actually cause disruption, denial, degrade, is a shift, in my opinion, of what we have to start preparing for as a community when it comes to cyber defense. I think the Sony attack was the first one that we responded to that we were pretty surprised to see North Koreans come after and do that much damage over a pretty bad movie. I mean, and I had to watch it after that attack. I'll never get those 2 hours back in my life because it was a really bad movie. But on the flip side of that, there was really significant consequences. Can you imagine coming into your government or commercial organization and finding out in the morning that over 5,000 systems are gone, and it's almost impossible to start doing investigations, recovery of that kind of disruption? And now we see the ransom attacks where they will not only come in and encrypt your drive, they'll encrypt your backup, and it is now causing significant business disruption that didn't happen a few years ago. Another trend that we saw over the last year is adversaries are starting to actually target network devices. So everyone has seen the 0 days and the Cisco routers, and everyone's seen some of the more publicly known ones, but what I can tell you is the non-public side of this is if they can get into your switch and router, or they can get into your VPN concentrator, it is a much more valuable target to be in, and they're going there. And so you have to start looking at, extending your defenses beyond just your kind of traditional security operations centers when you think about your security. Another trend that's also concerning is we're seeing a fairly significant uptick in the fact that the adversaries are getting smart, and instead of coming after an end target, they'll go compromise your service provider. And they'll go get your service provider, and then they use them as a launching pad to go hit dozens of other end targets. And so they're basically exploiting that trusted relationship between the service provider and whether it be the government or commercial entity. And so we do have to start evaluating our connectivity to service providers. We also have to evaluate our whole supply chain when you think about building a more robust cybersecurity program. And so unfortunately, but this is a fundamental truth, and this is something that when Kevin and I started saying this in 2004, people thought we were crazy. They thought there was no way you could build a company that was focused on incident response. There's no way you can come out and say security breaches are inevitable. Everyone was so laser focused on just prevention, and building and buying the next widget who claims that they can prevent everything from happening. The reality is that's fundamentally not the case, and it's never going to be the case. We would argue you can no longer solely rely on preventative cybersecurity. If you do, you are living in a legacy world where you will get compromised and you're going to struggle being able to properly remediate it. And why is that? There is no silver bullet from a technical position. All of these vendors who are sitting out here, including my own company, FireEye, does not have a silver bullet to stop everything that can come after you. If a vendor tells you that, send them away. That's just the reality, because it's not possible. There is going to be no legislative solution that keeps bad guys from attacking us. So they're always going to exist. We have to prepare for it. And I love the fact, that part of this conference theme is resiliency. How do we build a resilient environment so we can operate through attacks? Because there are very few risks and repercussions for the attackers. There are safe harbors It is so hard, and we spend a tremendous amount of money and R&D trying to track adversaries and work with intelligence and law enforcement agencies all over the globe to try to actually have some sort of action towards the adversary. And we've been very successful. You've seen a lot of hackers who have been arrested over the last 5 years. And that's because there's a lot of organizations, both public and private, who spend a lot of time on attribution and trying to find out who's doing the activity behind the scenes. The unfortunate reality is attackers will continue to exploit human trust. It's easy. If they can come after people and get people to do things, and unbeknownst to them, they're compromising their systems, they're going to continue to do it. Pure prey cybercrime organizations, unfortunately, continue to outpace traditional defenses. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Attackers will continue to reflect geopolitical conditions. So you saw that in the Ukraine, you saw that in a lot of the presentations earlier. You should expect any single time there is any sort of conflict between governments, especially militaries, there will be a cyber component in the future. And if countries don't prepare themselves both from an offensive and a defensive perspective, they will fall behind, in my opinion, of how to defend your nation in cybersecurity going forward. Attacks from China will be more surreptitious. I would like to say that FireEye and Mandiant played a very pivotal role on how the US government changed its policy and how aggressive they became towards the problems that we were seeing in the United States. Ever since the treaty was signed between China and the United States, we've seen a significant decrease of Chinese activity in the United States. They are living up to their word. However, what do you think those thousands of people are doing now? We've seen a significant uptick of those attackers attacking Asia and Europe. And so it worked for the United States, but that is still a problem, for other folks. We've seen just a shift in who the targeting is occurring. Now, the Russians have been unbelievably loud in attacking since that occurred. And so the Russians are all over US government agencies, the diplomatic side of the house. You saw us talk about Russians who hacked the DNC. So it's amazing to see how loud they have become. They used to be extremely quiet. So we're definitely seeing a shift there. An increase in cyber extortion and ransomware, massively on the rise. You're going to see that into the next year. We believe attribution is getting more and more important. Why? Because if you get 1 billion alerts in a day, how do you triage that? If you're getting hit by a bunch of malware and different attacks, how do you know how to make the right business risk decision of where to put your resources, how to spend your time? If you know this attack is coming from this group in Russia, this organized crime group, this team in North Korea, this team in China, here's what they do, here's what they'll likely do next, you can put prioritization around your alerting, and I would tell you, we've done this. And at our company, we've gone from a funnel of alerts that would be impossible for humans to look at, and we've applied orchestration, automation, and intelligence on that alert funnel, and we have significantly reduced the human capital it takes to solve this problem to a fraction of what government agencies are using to try to solve it, and what we've seen some security operation centers. And intelligence is the key to that. Disclosure expected to be more probable. Here in Singapore, we're just starting to talk about disclosure laws. As you start to mature from a disclosure perspective, you should expect that it's going to become more probable around the region. It's important as an organization to be the first you have the problem. So if it's getting disclosed by a third party, you are now on your heels when it comes to how to handle the crisis management side of this. So being the first to know is critically important. And when people do come to inspect, which they will at some point in time as you mature some of your regulations around the regions, you want to be able to withstand third-party inspection. So I believe the importance of all of this, and if there's only one takeaway that you get from my session, it's how do you redefine the win? You're never going to prevent 100%. And so the goal, the win, should be defined as eliminating the consequences of the breach. So if you can go from alert or detect to remediation in seconds or minutes, you've absolutely eliminated the consequences. They may have been able to break in, but if you can accomplish that, you've accomplished your goal. And it shifts the mind from prevention to more how to not just prevent, but how to detect and respond in machine speed. And so the fastest I've ever seen a sophisticated state-sponsored organization start targeting an organization, break in, and accomplish their mission is 7 minutes. And that was a US security company. a large US security company. And they were able to get their target in 7 minutes. So Kevin and I believe that you got to get to alert to fix in minutes. We also believe that the evolving threat landscape requires an adaptive defense. You can't have static technologies or a static strategy, where proactive hunting will become absolutely key. And history has shown us that technology alone cannot solve this problem. It is going to take a combination of expertise. And look at everywhere I go, there's a massive problem with having expertise, which is why we're talking so much about training programs. And so building a comprehensive strategy is absolutely going to take educating the people, bringing in real training, and having the technology and the intelligence to solve this problem. If you try to do it with just one of those, I would argue you will probably be well behind the power curve. Some of the best practices, I'm just going to go through 4 really briefly before I conclude. And that is, I'm still surprised that organizations don't even understand what's on their network. So identify critical assets. Know what means the most and protect it the most. And it's shocking where everyone just thinks everything is the same. And they try to build their security strategy around that. Proper credential management is still one of the #1 problems we see when we go out to organizations. You got to get your arms around that. Data and network segmentation, people talk about it, but in reality they don't do it. And so you do have to, in the same theme of know what matters most, you have to use both data and network segmentation to make sure that you're protecting your crown jewels. Visibility and detection, I would argue if you have exceptionally good network-based visibility, cloud-based visibility of what you're putting into the cloud, not from the cloud, and endpoint visibility, you have what you need, and then you had great intelligence, you can operate really quick. But here's the difference. You got to be able to trigger something on your network. Your security team has to go straight to an endpoint. It has to validate what just occurred on that endpoint, and you better be able to contain or remediate it. If you can't do that, you're not going to get to alert to fix in seconds. And that's what we do every single day in our company. We see that alert, we go straight to containment, and that's really what I believe is going to be a program that starts evolving past what the adversaries are able to do to us. And I do believe it's got to be intelligence-led. So how do you feed true intelligence into your systems to reduce the alert funnel, prioritize, add context, make better risk-based decisions? And there's a huge difference between the threat data feeds that you're all buying and true intelligence. If your intelligence doesn't come with context and the ability to prioritize, you're not really buying intelligence, you're buying a threat data feed. And there's a lot of vendors that are slinging threat data feeds, and I'd argue they're actually causing part of the problem by increasing the noise versus solving the problem. And then you got to get in front of the phishing problem, because it's still the #1 way that they're getting into the organization. So I will conclude by, one, saying thank you very much for fighting the good fight, and then one action item, just one thing. Let's all work really, really hard together as a community to give the advantage back to the defenders. Thank you very much.